Hello and welcome back to another Maya tutorial. Here I'm going to talk about the use of detach and separation. Okay, those are two very different things. Let me get into modeling here. And in mesh, you'll see that I have an option for separate. It is different from edit mesh and detach. Okay, very subtle differences when you look at them here, but they have very big. It's a very big impact on the changes that you would see in your viewport and how it affects your geometry. So let's get into creating some geometry here. First, I have a plane that I'll use for later to better show the differences in these two things. So let's look at first, let's create an object. I'll create this cone and I'm going to modify it some, make it larger. I'm going to move it up. I already had it set to assign to a certain color, so that's why it's like that. I'm going to play around with the geometry a little bit, and these are all things that you should know how to do for now. I'm actually changing the geometry so that it will um, react to the changes that I have in mind a little bit better. So I've raised this up, as you can see here, above this plane that I've given a checkerboard material to. Um, so let's get into what this is. Right now, it's a whole object, right? It's a pea cone. It just has a rounded cap on it. Now, if I take one of these objects and I right click and go to face, I can choose a face, okay? And I can alter that face. I can move that face and do whatever I want with it, just like you could with any poly. So if I take this right here and use my translate tool and I push this around, you can see that it is definitely affecting the other polys, the other geometry around that one face. So that is very different from if I were to detach one of these faces and move it around. So let's show what that looks like. While I'm in this mode, you can detach by either using edge or vertex. I'm just going to use edge for now. And what I'm going to do is drag select about half of this. And I'm going to do what is called edit mesh and detach. You see it changes the geometry a little bit because now rather than making it all into one um, rounded object, it's looking at these as different separate planes. Okay, so it kind of had a little effect to the actual look of this geometry. So now when I go into face, I can grab this right here, and if I move this geometry around, it actually detaches. It is totally separated. So whereas up here, it's still attached. So there's the differences there. And now I can take this and I can move this down as well. Now, how this is different from, say, separate can be seen here. So let's take a look here. We have this whole object. Go into object mode, and what I want to do is turn this object into what's called a rigid body. So I'm going to go to FX, and first what I want to do is apply gravity to this scene. So I'm going to go to field solvers, and I'm going to choose gravity. So here's gravity. It's set to its default, which is -1, which means it's going to pull downwards on the y-axis, which is great. This object, however, needs to be field solvers. Sorry about that. This object needs to be a rigid body. So what I'm going to do is go to field solvers, and I'm going to create a passive rigid body. And so by adding gravity, it's done that already. So this object needs to be a passive rigid body. And there we go. So when I play this, you see how it affects, it's still very much part of the same object. So it's detached, but it is still part of the same geometry. So let me undo that. Even though this is detached, as I go to the whole object, I can still move the whole thing around. It still is translated like one whole object. So that is detached objects there. So let me go back, and everything is rejoined here. Um, Now, if I wanted to, say, make this into separate that geometry, so I'm going to choose this, and now I want to go back to modeling, and I'm going to um, detach again because I undid that. So I'm going to detach this. I'm going to go into object mode, and now I want to go to mesh and separate. And what separate is going to do, any of the parts that have been detached and basically unglued from each other are going to act as separate objects. So I went and I'm going to apply this to the whole thing here. Half of this is detached. So now it's detached or separated and detached. At least the bottom part is detached first using the edit mesh detach. And then I went to whole object or object mode and went to mesh and separate. And again, it basically will make those parts appear like they are separate objects. So here I have this object here. You're going to notice is made up of a lot of different surfaces. So I have this and this and this. And so what I want to do, I have all these are separate things. So when you open up P cone, you'll see that it's subdivided. What I'm going to do is select all of them. And I want to apply gravity to every one of them. So I'm going to go to FX, Fields and Solvers, Gravity. So now this object right here needs to be a passive collider. So I'm going to go to, I'm going to go to Field Solvers, Passive Rigid Body. So it has something it will actually collide into. And I'll play. Notice how it shatters now. So if you wanted something to actually have an effect like it is actually being shattered and moved about, then that is how you would go about doing that. So every one of these little pieces are detached, as well as this top part of the cone, and they are all separated, which means they no longer act as one. So rather than them all moving in unison as it falls over, it shatters like glass. So that is it. That is the difference between working with detach and working with separate, and how you can work those two together to get a surface that looks very much, or get an effect that looks like this. So have fun with this and see what you can do with this new technique that you just learned. We'll see you next time.